It's October 11th, 1943. Somewhere in the Pérouse Strait, that narrow, mine-infested choke point between Hokkaido and Sakhalin Island, USS Wahoo is running for her life. Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton has just spent 6 days doing the unthinkable. He took his submarine into the Sea of Japan. Not around it, not near it, into it, through the only entrance the Japanese didn't have completely locked down. For almost a week, Wahoo hunted alone in waters no American submarine had entered since the war began. Japanese merchant ships, transports, tankers. Morton found them and killed them. Now he's trying to get out. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be a Japanese lake, impenetrable, protected by minefields, patrol boats, and aircraft. American submarines avoided it because getting in meant almost certainly not getting out. Morton didn't care. He'd already made Wahoo the most lethal submarine in the United States Navy. 20 ships confirmed sunk. Tens of thousands of tons of Japanese steel on the ocean floor. No other American subcommander came close. What Morton didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Japanese anti-submarine aircraft were already circling overhead, waiting. Wahoo never made it home. 79 men, officers, enlisted sailors, torpedomen, engineers, every single one of them gone. No distress call, no survivors, no wreckage found for 63 years. Just silence where the most aggressive submarine in the Pacific used to be. This is the story of how one submarine and one commander changed everything America knew about undersea warfare, and why the Navy's most successful hunter became its most mysterious loss. USS Wahoo wasn't always a legend. When she was commissioned on May 15, 1942, at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California, she was just another Gato-class fleet submarine, 312 feet long, 1,600 tons surfaced, 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft, a deck gun, diesel engines for surface running, electric motors for submerged operations, maximum depth, 300 feet, crew complement, approximately 80 men. On paper, Wahoo was identical to dozens of other submarines rolling out of American shipyards. Same dimensions, same armament, same capabilities. The difference wasn't the boat. It was who commanded her, and how he chose to fight. Her first 2 war patrols, under Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy, were disasters. Kennedy was cautious. He avoided contact when he could, and broke off attacks when the situation looked risky. The crew knew something was wrong. Wahoo returned from those early patrols with almost nothing to show for weeks at sea. Morale collapsed. The men called her a hard luck boat. Some requested transfers. The submarine that would become the most feared vessel in the Pacific was, in late 1942, considered a failure. Then the Navy made a decision that changed everything. In December 1942, Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton took command. Morton was 35 years old, built like a linebacker, and possessed a philosophy of submarine warfare that terrified his superiors almost as much as it would terrify the Japanese. His nickname was Mush, short for Mushmouth, a childhood tag that stuck. But there was nothing soft about how he intended to fight. Real quick before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country, and what time is it where you are right now? Always cool to see how far this story travels. All right, let's get back into it. When Dudley Morton took command of Wahoo, American submarines were losing the war. Not on paper. On paper, the U.S. Navy had deployed dozens of fleet submarines across the Pacific. They had the best boats, the best training, the best technology. They should have been strangling Japan's supply lines, sinking the tankers and freighters that kept the empire running. They weren't. In the first year of the war, American submarines sank far fewer ships than anyone expected. The numbers were embarrassing. Japanese merchant shipping continued almost unimpeded. Convoys moved between the home islands and occupied territories with little interference. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, iron ore from Manchuria, all of it flowing into Japanese factories, fueling the war machine that was pushing American forces back across the Pacific. The problem was twofold, and both parts were killing submarines. First, the torpedoes didn't work. The Mark 14 torpedo was the standard weapon aboard American fleet submarines. It was also catastrophically defective. The magnetic exploder, designed to detonate the warhead beneath a ship's hull, breaking its keel, triggered prematurely or not at all. The contact exploder, the backup system, had a firing pin that crumpled on impact instead of detonating. Submarine commanders watched their torpedoes run straight and true, strike enemy hulls dead on, and fail to explode. The Bureau of Ordnance refused to acknowledge the problem. For 18 months, they insisted their torpedoes worked perfectly. Submarine captains who reported failures were told they were missing, that their aim was off, that they were making excuses for poor performance. They weren't missing. The weapons were broken. USS Tenosa fired 15 torpedoes at a stationary, crippled tanker in July 1943. 13 hit, 11 failed to detonate. The tanker sat there, absorbing torpedo after torpedo, and didn't sink. Commander Daspit saved his last 2 torpedoes and brought them back to Pearl Harbor as evidence. Only then did the Navy finally admit the Mark 14 was fatally flawed. But the torpedo problem was only half of it. Second, American submarine commanders were fighting scared. Pre-war doctrine emphasized caution. Submarine captains were trained to avoid detection at all costs. Stay deep, stay quiet, fire from maximum range, retreat at the first sign of counterattack. Submarines were expensive. Crews were hard to replace. The institutional culture prioritized survival over aggression. The result was a submarine force that spent more time hiding than hunting. Patrol reports from 1942 are filled with missed opportunities. Commanders who spotted enemy convoys and chose not to attack. Captains who fired single torpedoes from 3,000 yards when doctrine called for salvos at 1,000. Boats that returned to port with full torpedo loads because every attack felt too risky. The Japanese knew American submarines were out there. They just weren't afraid of them. This was the situation Dudley Morton inherited when he walked aboard Wahoo in December 1942. A boat with low morale. A crew that had been on 2 failed patrols. Torpedoes that might or might not work. And a Navy culture that rewarded playing it safe. Morton intended to change all of it. His executive officer was Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, a brilliant tactician who would later command USS Tang and become the most decorated submarine officer in American history. Together, Morton and O'Kane developed an approach to submarine warfare that violated nearly every principle the Navy had taught them. Morton's philosophy was simple: find the enemy and kill him. Everything else was noise. Morton's first command patrol began on January 16, 1943. Wahoo departed Brisbane, Australia, with orders to reconnoiter Wewak Harbour on the northern coast of New Guinea and sink anything she found. What happened over the next 24 days rewrote the rules of submarine warfare. Morton made one change immediately. He put O'Kane on the periscope. This sounds minor. It wasn't. Traditionally, submarine captains ran their own attacks. They manned the periscope, called out bearings, calculated solutions, and gave the order to fire. They did everything. Morton thought this was stupid. A captain juggling a periscope, a stopwatch, and an attack plot couldn't command the boat. He was too busy with mechanics to think tactically. So Morton stood in the center of the conning tower and commanded. O'Kane handled the periscope and fed him information. The rest of the crew worked the torpedo data computer, tracked targets, and prepared weapons. It was delegation. It was trust. It was treating submarine combat like a team sport instead of a one-man show. No American submarine had operated this way before. Within weeks, every successful sub-commander in the Pacific would copy it. On January 24th, Wahoo found a Japanese convoy off Wewak. 4 ships, a destroyer escort. Morton didn't approach cautiously. He drove straight into the formation, submerged, and opened fire. The first torpedo hit the transport Buyo Maru. The second struck the freighter Fuke Maru. Morton swung the boat, reloaded, and fired again. When the destroyer came hunting, Morton didn't run. He turned toward it and fired down the throat, a head-on shot that was considered suicidal by Navy doctrine. The destroyer veered off. By the time Wahoo cleared the area, she'd sunk 3 ships and damaged a 4th. 1 attack, 1 morning, more tonnage than most submarines achieved in an entire patrol. The crew couldn't believe it. The hard luck boat had just torn through a convoy like it was target practice. Morton wasn't done. Over the following weeks, Wahoo hunted through the Caroline Islands and the waters around New Guinea. Morton attacked on the surface at night, where Wahoo's radar gave her an advantage over Japanese lookouts. He attacked submerged during the day, closing to ranges that made his torpedoes almost impossible to miss. When he ran out of torpedoes, he used the deck gun. On January 26th, Wahoo surfaced and shelled a Japanese submarine, I-2, that was resupplying a shore garrison. Morton ordered his gun crew to open fire at 5,000 yards. The I-2 submerged and escaped, but Morton had proven something. Wahoo would fight anything, anywhere, with any weapon available. The patrol ended on February 7, 1943. Wahoo returned to Pearl Harbor flying a broom from her periscope shears, the traditional signal for a clean sweep. 8 ships sunk. Over 31,000 tons of Japanese shipping destroyed. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Submarine's Pacific Fleet, met the boat personally. He'd never seen patrol results like this. No one had. Morton received the Navy Cross. O'Kane received the Navy Cross. The crew received a reputation. Wahoo was no longer a hard luck boat. She was the boat every submariner wanted to serve on, and every Japanese captain prayed he'd never meet. Over the next 8 months, Morton took Wahoo on 5 more patrols, each one added to the legend. The Yellow Sea, the Kuril Islands, the East China Sea. Morton went where other captains wouldn't, attacked targets others avoided, and came back with kill counts that seemed impossible. By October 1943, Wahoo had sunk 20 confirmed ships. Some post-war analyses credit her with more. Morton had transformed not just one submarine, but the entire submarine force. His tactics became doctrine. His aggression became the standard. Then he requested permission to enter the Sea of Japan. The Sea of Japan was a death trap. Every submarine commander in the Pacific knew it. Getting in meant transiting one of 3 straits: Tsushima between Korea and Japan, Tsugaru between Honshu and Hokkaido, or La Pérouse between Hokkaido and the Soviet-controlled Sakhalin Island. All 3 were narrow. All 3 were mined. All 3 were patrolled constantly by Japanese destroyers, aircraft, and sub-chasers. The Japanese called it their inner sea. No Allied submarine had operated there successfully since the war began. The few that tried either turned back or disappeared. Morton wanted in anyway. His reasoning was pure Mush Morton. If the Sea of Japan was so dangerous that no American submarine dared enter, then Japanese merchant shipping inside it would be unescorted. Captains would be relaxed. Convoys wouldn't zigzag. Anti-submarine measures would be minimal. It would be, in Morton's words, a virgin hunting ground. Admiral Lockwood approved the mission. Wahoo would depart Pearl Harbor, transit to the Sea of Japan via La Pérouse Strait, spend as long as possible hunting inside, and exit the same way. Simple on paper. suicidal in execution. Wahoo departed on September 9, 1943, carrying a full load of Mark 18 electric torpedoes. The Mark 18 was newer than the Mark 14, designed to leave no visible wake. Morton also carried something else, a new executive officer. Richard O'Kane had received his own command, USS Tang. Morton's perfect team was broken up. The transit took weeks. Wahoo moved north through the Pacific, past the Kuril Islands, avoiding detection. On October 5th, she slipped through La Pérouse Strait in the dark, running on the surface to maximize speed. Japanese patrol boats were everywhere. Morton threaded between them. By dawn on October 6th, Wahoo was inside the Sea of Japan. The hunting was everything Morton predicted. Japanese ships steamed without escorts. Freighters moved alone. Tankers followed predictable routes. Morton went to work. Over the next 4 days, Wahoo attacked repeatedly. Japanese records confirmed the carnage. On October 6th, she sank the cargo ship Konran Maru. On October 9th, she hit a convoy and sank 4 ships in a single engagement: Kanko Maru, Kogain Maru, Taman Maru No. 2, and Kamitsu Maru. Wahoo was tearing through the Sea of Japan like nothing the Japanese had ever seen. Morton radioed updates to Pearl Harbor, brief transmissions, coded, acknowledging kills. Lockwood tracked the reports with growing excitement and growing concern. Wahoo was deep inside enemy waters. Every day she stayed increased the risk. On October 11th, Morton made his run for home. La Pérouse Strait was the only exit. Wahoo had to transit the same narrow choke point she'd used to enter, but this time the Japanese were alert. Morton's attacks had triggered a massive anti-submarine response. Patrol aircraft flooded the strait. Destroyers swept back and forth. The element of surprise was gone. At approximately 9 a.m. local time, a Japanese Mitsubishi Ki-51 reconnaissance aircraft spotted a submarine on the surface in La Pérouse Strait. The pilot reported the sighting and called for support. Within minutes, additional aircraft arrived. The submarine submerged. It didn't matter. Japanese aircraft dropped depth charges in a coordinated pattern. Bombs detonated across the suspected position. An oil slick appeared. Then debris. Then silence. Wahoo never acknowledged another transmission. She never arrived at Midway, her scheduled refueling stop. She never came home. Admiral Lockwood waited. Days passed, then weeks. On November 9, 1943, the Navy declared USS Wahoo lost with all hands, 79 men, Commander Dudley Morton, gone. For 63 years, no one knew exactly where she lay. The Navy didn't know what killed Wahoo. They had theories: mines, depth charges, aircraft, maybe a combination. Japanese records captured after the war confirmed an anti-submarine attack in La Pérouse Strait on October 11, 1943, but the details were incomplete. Morton and his crew simply vanished into the cold waters between Hokkaido and Sakhalin. For decades, Wahoo's final resting place remained unknown. Then, in 2006, a joint Russian-American expedition located the wreck. She was sitting upright on the seafloor at approximately 213 feet, inside Russian territorial waters near the strait's northern edge. The hull showed clear evidence of damage. The bow section had buckled, likely from depth charge explosions or a mine detonation. Whatever killed Wahoo, it killed her fast. The discovery brought closure to families who had waited 63 years to know where their fathers, brothers, and husbands lay. The Navy conducted a formal memorial service. Wahoo was designated a protected war grave. She remains there today, undisturbed. But Morton's legacy didn't need a wreck site. It was already embedded in the DNA of the submarine force. After Wahoo's early patrols proved what aggressive tactics could achieve, the entire Pacific submarine fleet transformed. Commanders who had played it safe suddenly found themselves reassigned. Officers who showed initiative got boats of their own. The cautious, survival-first doctrine of 1942 gave way to the hunter-killer mentality Morton had pioneered. The results were devastating for Japan. American submarines sank over 1,300 Japanese merchant ships during the war. They destroyed nearly 5 million tons of shipping, strangling the island nation's ability to import raw materials or move troops. By 1945, Japan's merchant fleet was functionally annihilated. Oil couldn't reach refineries, food couldn't reach cities. The empire starved. Submarines represented less than 2% of U.S. Navy personnel in the Pacific. They accounted for over 55% of Japan's maritime losses. Morton didn't live to see those numbers, but he built the culture that made them possible. Richard O'Kane, Morton's executive officer, went on to command USS Tang. He applied everything he'd learned aboard Wahoo and became the war's top-scoring submarine ace. 31 confirmed ships sunk. Tang was eventually lost to a circular run from one of her own torpedoes, a malfunction that sent the weapon circling back into the boat that fired it. O'Kane survived, was captured, and spent the rest of the war in a Japanese prison camp. He received the Medal of Honor. Morton received the Medal of Honor posthumously. It was awarded in recognition of his extraordinary valor across multiple patrols, his transformation of submarine tactics, and his willingness to take Wahoo where no American submarine had gone before. Today, the lessons Morton taught are still studied at the U.S. Naval Submarine School in Groton, Connecticut. His insistence on delegation, putting the best man on the periscope regardless of rank, became standard doctrine. His belief that submarines should hunt aggressively, not hide passively, shaped Cold War strategy and continues to influence modern undersea warfare. 79 men followed Dudley Morton into the Sea of Japan. They knew the risks. They went anyway. Wahoo's final patrol sank at least 4 confirmed ships, possibly more. She tied down Japanese anti-submarine forces across an entire sea. She proved that no waters were safe from American submarines, not even the ones Japan thought it owned. Morton once told his crew that Wahoo was expendable, that their job was to sink enemy ships, and everything else came second. He meant it, they believed him, and together they changed the war.